Tales of children living and surviving in the wild have fascinated us for centuries. From Romulus and Remus, the mythical twins raised by a she-wolf, to the legendary Tarzan of the Apes. Each of these wilderness children has reportedly learned the ways of the jungle, the language of their adopted family, and survived for years away from all human contact. But are these stories fact or fiction? Could a child really survive alone in the forest? Would animals care for rather than eat a human baby? And if left in the wilderness, can a child forget its human origins and transform into a wild beast?
Would I rule it out? No. It may be possible, it may have been possible, it may have happened.
My gut instinct is to say some are probably real and some are not.
Feral has many different meanings, but here we're using it in the sense of children who either reared themselves without human companionship, or more likely were reared by some form of animal.
Dr. Douglas Candland has studied the phenomenon of feral children and their alleged interactions with wild animals. He's examined hundreds of reported cases and says that most rely on eyewitness accounts and have certain elements in common.
They all said the child had no recognizable speech. The child did not like to eat cooked food. The child walked on all fours. So, quite properly, people were saying, this is a wild child.
But just how reliable are these accounts? One of the most compelling cases in modern history comes from Kampala in Uganda. Kampala is home to over 1 million people who, like most city dwellers, face a sometimes difficult commute to work. But one wrong turn on these dusty roads can lead to some of the world's thickest jungle. 2 hours south of Kampala, on the edge of Africa's untamed forests, lies Bombo Village. It was here, in 1991, that a remarkable story emerged. A woman walking through the African brush one day was startled by a group of vervet monkeys chattering in the trees. The monkeys were a common sight around the outskirts of the village, often stealing food and bothering the locals. But as the woman watched them, she caught a glimpse of something that terrified her. A dark form crouching in the branches. The creature that caused her to run was a human boy. Later, when the woman realized what she'd seen, she went back into the jungle and brought the child home. News of the strange boy quickly spread. The local villagers felt sorry for him, but they weren't quite sure what they were seeing.
Everybody came to see the new boy, who had hair all over, and he had no toe. The toe was bitten by monkeys.
Children from the village recalled that when the boy first arrived, he was as wild as an animal.
He could scratch you like you are not a human being. Do you know how a cat does? He could scratch you like a cat.
They decided that the boy must have been in the forest for a while. Apparently, he hated to be kept indoors, wouldn't eat cooked food, and didn't like to wear clothes. And he wouldn't or couldn't talk. But the boy did seem to be able to communicate with the vervets and even moved like a monkey.
He was moving like this, just like a monkey.
Whoa! Whoa! I think we are wondering, what kind of guy is this? It was really amazing to see such a guy making noise of an animal.
So who was this mysterious wild child? Local authorities eventually identified him as John Sabunya, a 4-year-old that had gone missing from a nearby village a year earlier. To this day, the villagers believe it was the monkeys that helped this defenseless child to survive alone in the wild. It's a romantic notion, but is this really what happened? Perhaps the only way to find out for sure is to ask John Sabunya himself what he remembers. When it comes to stories of feral children, it's often hard to separate fact from fiction. Most of the cases occur in remote areas, where the details are poorly documented. And then there's the input of the media. Stories of children raised by animals make for sensational headlines, and the details often get lost in copy that's written to satisfy an audience thrilled by news of the weird. Many such stories eventually turn out to be fabrication. Shortly after John was rescued by the village woman, he was taken to an orphanage run by a Ugandan couple, Molly and Paul Waswa, who at any given time had up to 1,000 children in their care. But Molly admits that John was different from all the other children. She recalls the villagers' first impressions of him.
People were surrounding him, it looked like some people wanted to have a look at him and laughing at him and thinking that he's a monkey boy. They told him he's half human and half animal.
At first, Molly found the idea of keeping John in her household shocking.
I said, oh my God. I told my husband, why have you brought such a person? I mean, I said, this thing will snatch our baby and run away with it.
But Molly's husband, Paul, saw something special in John.
He was convincing everyone in the home that this boy will become somebody.
It didn't take long for him to convince Molly.
I came back to my senses. I said, I must look after him like my own.
Now 17 years old, he still lives at the orphanage, but as the adopted son of Molly and Paul. In many ways, John's like any other teenage boy. He hangs out with his friends, and he's mad about sport. In the years since he left the jungle, he's made tremendous progress. But to this day, he has trouble learning. John functions at a kindergarten level, and he speaks and understands only a little Ugandan and English. But in other ways, John has excelled. His love of running led Molly and Paul to enter him in the Special Olympics, and this has now become a passion.
People believe that by studying such cases, you could really see what was natural about human beings and what in a human being is social or is acquired.
Victor of Aveyron walked out of the woods at the very height of this debate.
In the case of Victor of Aveyron, we have reports of sightings of him dating from at least a year before his definitive capture. There is a strong possibility that he had been living that way for at least 3 years and perhaps longer.
Here was an apparently genuine case of a child, about 12 years old, who'd been cut off from society and was living in the wild. Was this boy a natural human, or had he devolved into an animal? Was he the product of nature or nurture? But if Itar and the public had been expecting a noble savage, they were sorely disappointed. Victor was no Tarzan. As Truffaut's film shows, the boy remained wild and uncontrollable. Most disappointing of all was that while he clearly understood some words, Victor never really developed human speech. How could society get the answers it wanted if the boy couldn't give them? Itar's frustration grew as the boy continuously failed to respond, and his critics became increasingly hostile. In the end, Itar gave up, and Victor spent the rest of his life in an institution. With Oksana, Victor, and John Sabunya, the important stories may be those of the abuse and neglect they suffered at the hands of their human caretakers. And perhaps the myth of the wild child reflects our inability to accept the failings of our so-called civilized society.